Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of BLS Show and Tell with Nathan Walker. Nathan, welcome to the Virtual Studio.
Thank you so much, Bram. What an honor to be here.
It's great to have you. You've been on my list since I started BLS, and it's nice that you're finally here. Today, we're going to talk about NativeScript and Capacitor, one of NativeScript's newest features, I think. I think it got into NativeScript 7 or 8.
Yeah, since 7, yeah.
Very cool. Very interested to see how it goes. But I also want to take the opportunity and ask you a little bit about your history as a developer. This is not really common in BLS, but it will be more common. You're one of the most versatile devs I know. You're not a standard, CS degree getting into programming. So if you could briefly enlighten us, what's your professional background and what got you into native development?
I'm going to try to keep this brief. Thanks for asking, and we'll try to keep it in 5 minutes because we got a lot of exciting stuff I want to share about NativeScript with Capacitor in particular. Let's see, the quick 5-minute clip. I had a baby when I was pretty young. I was 19 years old, got an internship through the business school. I was a business marketing major and got involved with an industrial company who needed tech, and kind of fell by accident into tech at the time. It was totally unexpected. It was not a field that I planned for. And I was looking for a job to support my family at the time. I'm 19 years old and got into tech, started doing a lot of web design stuff. And it sort of blossomed from there. I started a company when I was in college and did some pretty large invoicing systems based in Java with shoe retailers around the area. And that got me into web objects. Web objects was Apple technology. They still use it behind the iTunes store. And I was so enlightened by it and so enjoyed the tech community in general. It was a very welcoming experience. And it not only was able to help me support my family at the time, but I found just the community around tech extremely positive and a lot of fun to work with. And so I was so inspired by that. I started a video podcast when I was about 21 years old, and it was called Web Objects Works. And this was on kind of the early versions of the iTunes video podcast stuff. We maybe did 6-7 episodes, but I would interview other devs out there who were doing web objects. And it wasn't a field that was easy to find developers in. And so I partially did the podcast to meet others that were doing that technology, but also just kind of share my own love for it. So I would do these kind of video segments where I would show authentication with web objects and getting into everything there. And Chuck Hill is a name that comes to mind, who was one of the published authors in web objects back at that time. And shout out to Chuck Hill if you're still around, still in tech. But yeah, it was a really neat whirlwind experience that did end me up in a 2-3 tier interview with Apple. They were interviewing for the music store engineering group at the time. I was 21 and went through about 3 interviews. And this was all from the podcast. So it very early showed me at a young age kind of where podcasting in general could do for you. But it was just fascinating. Everything kind of grew from there, and I just got deeper and deeper into stuff. Just from being in web objects at the time, I think that led me into some Apple technologies, and I started doing Objective-C apps and general mobile development and that sort of thing, and started doing it professionally. And then that kind of always kept evolving over time. And eventually, what ended up happening is I put a inquiry into a Craigslist ad for engineers from a really enlightened and really exciting entrepreneur out of the Portland, Oregon area. And I was based out of Georgia and Tennessee at the time. And he wanted a prototype done, and I built the prototype in a week using some technologies, some combined technologies. And he liked it, and he brought about 5 engineers all to live in a house together, real world style, in Portland, Oregon, in corporate housing. We never met each other before, and it was a big shot in the dark and a huge risk, and it turned out to be a ton of fun. And we ended up, most of us, it was these 5 developers. We'd never met each other, but we've been working together for 9 months on this project after this prototype was built. And we just ended up in a house together. We lived together. And once I ended up in Portland, I really got involved in the startup community there. And Portland has a great tech startup community. Right. And I just had a lot of fun there and worked with that startup for like 2 years. And it was a wild ride, and ended up working for other startups there in Portland. This kind of went from there.
Awesome. Super nice, super interesting. And so yeah, longtime dev. You also have history in graphics, if I recall correctly, doing graphic design.
That first company, my internship, started out just design, and I had been doing some kind of graphics related stuff. I was in art school, so I have a minor in art and a major in business marketing. But my art stuff goes back to just my childhood. I always done drawing and stuff like that. But graphics kind of came with the web, and did graphic design and video, and was in Nashville for a period of time playing music, because my main goal was actually to play music professionally. And software was the day job and music was the night job when I lived in Nashville. But you know, music being as competitive as it was, and I just really did love tech, so I try to balance it when I can. But I love doing tech, and in fact today, maybe perhaps a good segue to today. What we're about to get into today is really all about having fun with technology, because this is really a fun integration between NativeScript, and really shows you, how technology in general can be combined together to really solve some just real world practical stuff.
Let's dive right into it. I'm super excited to have shared your story, and maybe at some point when BLS interviews will get there, we can dedicate a whole section and do some tips for devs that are starting out. I'm just gonna share the screen. That should be on right now. I'm gonna put ourselves down below here and look at, we have a few people here. Osai is here. Go check out the talk that Osai did with Nathan on ngconf. Here is Jay Hildress, and Serkan is also here. Always good to see here. And Derlis, which is my lovely wife. They're all here, all usual suspects. So let's dive right into it. It's NativeScript and Capacitor. So what is the app we're looking at?
Well, let's first start out. There's one thing we did not do at ngconf, and I got a couple comments about it. And I want to start out with what we're talking about here. We're talking about Ionic Framework. We are talking about Capacitor.js. Actually, let me get to Capacitor.js right here. So Ionic Framework, Capacitor.js, and then also NativeScript for Capacitor, which is the particular integration. Ionic is a great front-end toolkit for the web. It actually does a great job at mobile platform toolkits and UI toolkits, and really, really nice, high-quality stuff where you can do the web on mobile. Capacitor is the runtime, so this is what allows that web app to be deployed and run and integrate with all the great device features that are out there. And then NativeScript for Capacitor is an integration specifically for the latest version of Capacitor, which is in RC currently. It's Capacitor 3, and that's RC 0, I think they are on currently. And this integration was made specifically for this this future version of Capacitor that you can use today. And it enables NativeScript development right inside of Capacitor. So what we're looking at here on the screen is a Ionic app that I created using the Ionic CLI. And this was Ionic Start. And I used the tabs template to create this, so that a lot of people who've used Ionic before are probably familiar with this template. It is the tabs template. The project is that Ionic project base, so we can look at the package dependencies just to see what we're working with here.
Yeah.
Go back over here. And we can see we're using Angular 11.2 latest. The main thing is that we're using Capacitor latest. So again, this is 3. This is the RC 0 here. Everything else is on the latest. And I did install the NativeScript for Capacitor integration.
Right.
And that is done just with this package here. It's called NativeScript Capacitor.
Right. The NativeScript or NPM scope. /capacitor.
That's right. That package will install the integration into any Ionic capacitor app, and again, capacitor 3. And what it will add off the bat is a NativeScript folder and this native custom.d. And we'll break it down slowly as to what this is, what it's about, and then kind of what you can do with it. The NativeScript folder is an isolated bundle. This actually gets bundled into a separate JS bundle that Capacitor loads right when the app boots and allows all your NativeScript code to be executed and callable from your Ionic components. The nice thing about the way this is integrated is that it does not affect your web app at all. So anything you're doing in Ionic in general, it can be totally mixed in with all that code, and it's completely inactive in the web browser. So this allows you to kind of have this code and these helpers in there and not have to worry about it breaking your web app. And I'll kind of show you how it sort of works, and I'll show you some interesting things about the beta, which NativeScript for Capacitor is in beta right now. And it will be released when Capacitor 3 is released with some additional kind of extras, I guess, and some fixes, some little fixes and stuff we'll talk about.
Right.
So the NativeScript folder gives you some TypeScript files, and it gives you a package itself. It has a references D here. This includes the types. This is what enables the native types to come through. And it's also got its own TS config that's configured just for this space in your code. The index file is a way to expose different helpers to your Ionic code base. And the way it's designed is that this native custom.d, this is an interface to where you can expose strong typing against any custom API that you want to use. And we'll kind of talk about that in general, why you'd want to do that, when you'd want to do that, and those sorts of things. But let me show you one of the examples that come with the integration right out of the box, just to show you something working. There is one example in the latest beta 1 that we provide, and it is a native modal integration, just showing you raw native API access to iOS and Android right here in your TypeScript code. And we're just constructing a straight iOS view controller. We're modifying properties on it. We're even creating a UI label. These are things you can find actually in the Apple documentation. Right. So a lot of NativeScript is about letting you go to the source documentation. Let's see, Apple developer, let's go UI label. And we can actually look at some of these things here. So here's actually the documentation on UI label. Anything that's in the Apple docs and thus the Android docs, you can use with NativeScript right away. Most of the things with NativeScript is just knowing how to call it from NativeScript, but all these things are actually available to work with right here. The benefits that provide for development is just less delays in getting into things. Also, plugins that may not be available currently today, or plugins that are available out there that don't quite work right. And it may take you more time to go and try to tweak that plugin and cross-integrate it back in. So it's really all about kind of giving you the platform at your fingertips to solve real practical problems without a lot of delay. That's a lot of what it's about. And again, it's all TypeScript, so it's strongly type checked. So everything is type safe, and you get the real errors on the platform that you would, if you call something improperly and that sort of thing. And we can even try doing something like that.
But this is what I did some NativeScript development with you, actually, with projects you got me into mostly. And this is what I always explain NativeScript. It's like the native API. You have the real native API, but you have a TypeScript layer on top of it. But you still code the actual real deal. So it's not like an abstraction that sits on top of it.
It's right. It's not a bridge. The thing that's unique about NativeScript is that, and probably the most brilliant thing that the founders of the technology did, is they created a metadata builder. And the metadata builder is probably the most brilliant piece of tech in NativeScript. It basically creates a TypeScript mapping of the platform API to give you the strong types right from TypeScript. And then the runtime, what it enables is real-time execution of that code. So when this code's actually executing, it's executing in real time synchronously against the platform as it would if it was executed in Objective-C or Swift.
Yeah, awesome.
And Java for that matter. So this on the top is also an Android example that comes with, again, these things are straight out of the Android docs, just like I showed UI label come from there. You can find Android widget linear layout. These are the API docs. And so, I mean, anything you can find in those documentations for Apple and Android, you can type directly here in NativeScript. So what does that mean exactly? Well, I have a really nice capacitor and ionic setup here going. And what I like to do with ionic is I love this ability to configure capacitor to serve up from a live sync URL. And this is not configured out of the box with capacitor, but you'll find it in their docs. So you can set up a server URL to point towards your local IP. And this is just the local IP on my WAN network here. And I set clear text true. And what this allows me to do is when I run the capacitor app here in the actual device. So this is actually running on my phone, my iPhone here.
Oh, you're doing a recorder. Yep.
I can live sync changes that we do from the Ionic code base, and they live sync on this device without rebooting. It's pretty slick.
Yeah.
So what we're going to do is actually do just that. We're going to wire up this sample that comes with the integration. So open native modal view. This native object, before I get too ahead of myself, this native object is provided by NativeScript for capacitor. The really neat thing about the native object is it is technically a JavaScript proxy. And it being a JavaScript proxy is why it is active when it's running on the target platform and inactive when it's not. So it's inactive when it's executed or called from a web browser context, but it is active and enabled when running from iOS or Android. So this native object can be expanded upon. So you can build and add your own helper methods to it for different platform device features that you need to access. And one thing I always like to state, and I mentioned this in the comments at NGConf too around this, always check capacitor and ionic docs first. Capacitor and ionic has a rich plugin ecosystem too, so you can always see what's available from there. There's a lot of stuff they have available. So this integration is really all about enabling angles into your development that may be difficult otherwise for things that are currently available. And maybe it enables some other cases with your development that might be tricky to do in typical plugin style development. So let's take a look at this sample. Open Native Modal is also exposed here as a typing here, and it's actually this native custom definition that allows our ionic components to pick it up. So we can go over here to one of our ionic components here, and let's actually add something from here. I'm going to add just an A tag that we can bind up to something we can call. And I'm just going to put this down here. My screen's going a little bit slow through the
for recording the phone.
Might be, but we'll make do with what we got. And so I'm just creating an A link here to a method called open modal. And I'm going to go into my ionic component here. I'm going to create that method. And I'm going to use the native object here. And I should get IntelliSense. And we can see that I can import from NativeScript capacitor. And that gives us this native object. This is the JavaScript proxy that I was talking about. From here, we get IntelliSense off of all native APIs, but we also get, in addition to those, our custom helpers. So for instance, we have off of this open native modal here. And we'll see if VS Code. Yeah, with the screen share going, my computer's lagging just a pinch.
This is something that's quite common to happen.
Actually, let me shut down a few apps here too, just to make sure we got.
I guess we've all been there.
All the juice that we can here.
Now, one thing I already took away from this this session here, and I think this is something you probably relate to with your podcasts. You always pick up a ton of things. I didn't know about the capacitor live sync, and I was always like, okay, build, compile, running capacitor, but you can actually do it live. So this is pretty sweet.
I'm not sure when they added it. They may have had that for a while. There's a live reload section on the docs that does detail that, and I'm not sure how long it's been up there, but it is pretty nice. So this is the native object being imported into a Angular Ionic component. So this is that Explorer container, and we're just binding it through a method called OpenModal. To an A-link here. Now, if I hit save, we should get live reload, and it should reload here on the right, which is on my device. Let's see if it works.
Actually going to put ourselves on the side so we can get a bit of a better view of the app. I think it's still readable. And yeah, this is always the thing. But I really like that how you have these custom native types, and it basically augments whatever you have there. So you can pick up whatever is there and add to it.
That's a particular thing, by the way, we'd love people's feedback on, because one of the main things with the integration, we were trying to figure out the easiest, most intuitive way that people could expand on that while still gaining that strong type checking that you want against anything custom that you're augmenting. Right. And this is what we came up with. And in practice, we built a fairly sizable app for ngconf, and it the development experience feels good, but I'm sure, like with anything, there's a lot of possibilities of things we can do. So let me just check here. What's oh, I see. Our Angular app was bundling, and there it is. There you go. So here's our device. So we got just a little bit of delay on the live stream here, but what we did is we added an A-link inside of our Ionic view here. And we are now using the example that we get from NativeScript for Capacitor. And what I'm going to do is just tap on this right now. And that's what it does. There you go.
Awesome. And I think you can see that it's really a modal because it pushes the main app or main activity to the background.
That's right.
This is really iOS stuff.
Now, it's worth noting, Ionic has stuff like this. Okay, so this is really a rudimentary example, but it's meant to kind of demonstrate what's actually happening here. You know, this is a live construction of a UI view controller on the fly. When you tap Open Native Modal, that is literally executing code as you would directly if you had written the app in Objective-C and Swift. But in this case, we wrote it in TypeScript, and it's executing this code in real time against the device. And if you run it on your device, you can see how fluid it is. NativeScript's very mature at this point. It's been developed and deployed for 6+ years now, and it's very fast. So that's what's happening here. If we were to run this capacitor app on Android, we'd see a similar thing where we see a Android actual fragment appear on the screen in a similar vein. So yeah, let's take it from here. And let me show you a couple interesting things about this integration, unless you've got a question just about that before I go further.
I think the thing probably to take away here, if you would use a Ionic modal window, it would represent in the same web view, and it would be a component that renders inside this view. And here you have like a real activity that basically sits on top of Ionic web view, if I understand it correctly.
Yes, so this integration gives you access to the root view controller that's actually presenting your Ionic app. Right. So Ionic is hosted on the iOS platform, and NativeScript gives you direct access to that platform. So that means you have access to everything that Ionic is sitting in. So that means you can interact with the platform as you would expect to if you were in that native environment, and you can interact with that view controller that Ionic's in, and you can do anything that you want to do with the platform APIs, really.
That's awesome. Yeah, super nice.
So from there, let me show you a couple interesting things about the integration that really aren't right now stated in the docs, and I'll explain the reason why not yet. So I'm going to do something sort of interesting here. I am going to create the a method here, and we'll call it is low power mode enabled. And what I want to show here is that this native object, so I said a moment ago that you have access to your custom augmentation methods. These are helper methods that you can execute, that you can develop yourself and do all sorts of things. They're kind of like pure methods, if you will, that you might sprinkle compositionally into your app with typical development. So what you can also do from this native object, as I mentioned, it has access to the full scope of APIs here. So what that means is we can actually get access to things that are native to the platform from here without writing a custom helper method. So we'll deal with our slight delay from the live stream here and see if we can get an IntelliSense stack up here.
Right. And fact, so I guess from looking at the name of the method, we want to basically have NativeScript tell us, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so here is an example of things that are coming from the iOS platform. So NS process info is something you can find in the Apple docs. This is actually a particular API that iOS provides that gives you access to this process info. And from there, we can actually get something called low power mode enabled right here. Now, I know this stuff, I've been working around iOS for a long while, but you can go and find this stuff in the docs. And again, you can experiment with different things here. But low power mode enabled, the real interesting thing about the way that this integration works goes back to what I said about the JavaScript proxy. Native object is a JavaScript proxy. That means that when this code is executed in your Ionic component, each call and each dot notation is actually executed against the platform through the JavaScript proxy. And what that means is for values, because we're inside a web view, always you can get a value back from the platform here, always asynchronously.
Right.
And the way that's enabled is through a special API and typing that NativeScript for Capacitor provides in this context. So I want to show you that because it is interesting, and there's actually a couple interesting things to note about it. So low power mode enabled, if we take a look, provides a strong type checking against native property. Native property is something that NativeScript for Capacitor in particular adds, and it gives you this API called get or set. And that takes a callback that gives you the value of that we can then basically just log out here. So we'll log out that low power mode enabled this here, and we'll log the value of that here. And I'll show you one omission that's in the beta too that will be fixed in the final release related to this, which is why I wanted to show this example first. So this is a Boolean value that comes off of this. This is going to tell us if the device is in low power mode enabled mode, and we're actually going to go ahead and save that.
And we need to invoke the method somewhere.
We do need to invoke the method somewhere. So let's actually wire something up to our view here. And let's just wire up that method. We'll call this right here. We'll do just a similar thing here for a couple different examples. And this is going to be is low power mode enabled, and we'll wire it to that. So let me save that, and we should get a new button that shows up in our app over here for low. There we go. So now all I'm doing is logging out. So let's go to Xcode, which is actually running our app at the moment. We can see the web view loaded when the live sync kicked in.
Right.
And let me move this over just a slight bit. So on my device, I'm going to tap that link now. And we can see we get low power mode enabled here. So we know we got the value back. But curiously, you'll see the value is actually blank.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually an omission that's in the beta right now. Boolean values are shuttled back as empty values. And so if what's curious is that if you were to look at the type of this, so if we actually print out what the type of this is, you'll see, let's reload and do low power mode enabled. You'll see the type of is actually a string. So this is just an emission that's in the beta as far as Boolean values go.
Right.
And when I'm talking Booleans, it's just Booleans that have this emission in the beta. I'll show you something else interesting here, which is related to non-Boolean values. Let's say like a string. So we're going to use the same method here to do another example. Something else that we get off of iOS here is NSString. This is something that those who've done iOS development probably know of quite well by now. NSString, and just some history on NS. In Swift, they generally remove the NS prefix now, so it's just known as string there. But NS goes back to the Next Step days with Apple and Steve Jobs there, and that NS prefix is on a lot of classes in the stack for iOS, and that's kind of where it derives from. So that was their name prefix domain for almost everything in the API, even web objects.
Right.
Yeah.
And interesting that you still see the same stuff coming back. What is it, like 15, 20 years later?
Yeah, it is. It is very fascinating. So I'm going to do something sort of interesting here. I'm actually going to assign a native return result back here to a const. Okay, I'm actually going to remove this. And I'm going to turn this into an async. We're going outside of is low power mode enabled here, and I'm going to swing back to it. But for a moment, we're going to use this example to show you something else interesting here. So we're going to take the string value in this case. So at this point, what we have is an NSString instance assigned in a pointer from the JavaScript proxy. And what we can do is we can actually use the JavaScript proxy's ability from the native class here, and we can actually asynchronously resolve what that native value is. And because it's a string, we'll actually see it this time. So I'm going to use in any cast here, and I'll explain why I'm going to do this here in just a minute. And so this is just a fascinating note about NativeScript for Capacitor right now. These typings that are enabled, all of the platform typings that give back primitive values, so those are things like strings, ints, numbers, booleans, those sort of things, they all have a native property return value, which gives you a get and set property. And that allows you to get values asynchronously from here, from inside Ionic components. And it also lets you to set native values asynchronously. For things that are not primitives, things that are objects, like NSString string with string, this is actually an API on the iOS platform that returns an actual NSString. This is an instance of an object, okay, not a primitive value. Right. You can actually get the value, the raw value of that thing by using a special value prop off the JavaScript proxy, which actually is an async promise for that value. And we're going to await that value, and then we're going to print out here in the console log actually what the raw NSString value is here. And this is, again, an arbitrary example, but just showing you something really interesting about the integration and what you can do. So
yeah, string handling goes well with JavaScript or TypeScript out of the box. So this is kind of made up, but definitely interesting to see how you can pick up basically any object from your Objective-C thing.
That's right, and deal with it here in Ionic in the web view. So we've got a pure native object here assigned in a JavaScript variable string. We're actually going to resolve its value asynchronously using this value prop that comes from NativeScript for Capacitor. And in the final version, this will probably be in the typings. So I'm just casting to any for now because the typings that are in the beta right now don't give you this. But I want to show everyone on this call this because this is an aspect of it that I'm sure not many people know about, but it's actually possible. So in a string value, let me save that there. And let's see if we get our live reload. And there's the web view loaded. So when you see that web view loaded, that means a live reload did kick in. So if I tap that button now, we can see NSString value is hello. So this shows you a couple interesting things about the integration, mainly why I wanted to start out with this example. This shows you how to actually call directly native APIs from the Ionic components and from Ionic code. I mean, this could be in a Angular service. Really doesn't matter where it's called from. You can call it from anywhere. And you can get back primitive values using the get. You can also set values that same way, all from here, without creating custom methods. So custom methods is really a convenience that the integration provides you, just if you want to condense that all into the helpers that are here. And you can expose your own set of helpers out. But it also works this way as well if you're calling it directly. So that's just something interesting I wanted to show. Perhaps a more interesting example that directly relates to that is screen brightness. So screen brightness is something we can actually see pretty directly. So I'm going to jump to a screen brightness example here.
I guess screen brightness returns a number, integer probably.
Does return an integer.
Yeah.
And we can set its value too. And we'll do something interesting here. We're going to use some APIs that come from Ionic and Capacitor, and they provide, let me make sure I know what package it comes from. It comes from Ionic Angular. It's called the loading controller. And we're going to do a loading controller on the screen. We're going to show a little spinner, and in a timeout, we're actually going to adjust the brightness so we can open the hardware, the device UI, and actually see that hardware react to it in real time. So let's actually bring in the loading controller. So I'll call this loading controller here. And again, this is just something Ionic provides. And we will set up one of these down here. And I'll set up another async method here that we can call.
And I imagine for those of us that like to work with observables more than promises, you can wrap these methods in like a defer or in a from operator from RxJS, and then you can go observables all the way.
Absolutely could.
Yeah, that's definitely nice.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm just setting up a 3-second duration spinner. It's going to give us enough time that when we tap the button, we can swipe down our UI panel on the device, and we can actually see our hardware react in real time to a brightness change. So let me do this. Set timeout, and I'm going to use the direct API from here without a helper. So I'm going to do native. Again, this is just an API from the Apple Docs UI screen. And we can get from there the main screen. And this is the brightness property that's on the main screen. And just like we got a value above using get, we can set a value. And so we're going to set this to 0.8 brightness. And on my device over here, I'm actually going to make sure the brightness is turned down to about right there. And let's wire this up to a button that we can trigger. So increase screen brightness here. Okay. Add it to the list of our playful A-links here.
And I really like to see that it's really a marriage between NativeScript, Capacitor, Ionic. It really fits in well. It's
It really does. It just feels pretty natural. NativeScript development is natural for most that have been doing TypeScript for a long time because it is standard TypeScript development. But yeah, so I'm going to add increased screen brightness here. We added a trigger. Let's hit save, and let's see if we get our reload over here. And let's see if we can't get this to work. So there, increased screen brightness there. Bring this to the front. And what we're going to do is I'm going to hit the button. We should see a spinner appear from the Ionic Angular library. And then I'm going to swipe down. We'll see if our brightness appears. So there's increased screen brightness, and it did. It actually increased right there. So if you remembered a moment ago, my brightness was right about there, and we increased it to 0.8.
Awesome.
So again, that is just direct hardware access in a single line of code using NativeScript to change something like screen brightness. There's a lot of things on the device that are single liners like that you'd be surprised. You know, when you take a look at like features that are on your device, everything from the flashlight to maybe even starting a screen recording to setting like an alarm time set, all things like that have pretty simple APIs directly on the platform. And so really what NativeScript's about is about just going to the source documentation and just using the device as it's intended, really, without having to create some ceremony around that.
That's awesome. Now I can imagine one thing, if you support both Android and iOS, which you probably do, this is going to be an if statement. Like if you device Android, do this.
So a couple things about, and that's a great segue for the helpers versus calling directly. So the question often, you know, with this integration comes down to when to call an API directly from Ionic code base like this, and when to create a helper. Helper methods are really useful for maintenance and organization because you can organize all of your NativeScript code, of course, in one spot, so it keeps it nice and tidy. You could imagine a folder setup here that's architected and organized really well with clear folder names for different aspects or features that you're integrating with on the device, and then you're creating these different helpers inside of there, and then your index here is just exposing all those out, and that just allows you to call native dot whatever that helper is that you created, right? So as far as like iOS and Android code, you can use a conditional like we have in the example that comes out. You can see this one is wrapped in if native dot is Android. You can use that same conditional inside of your Ionic components. But what we would probably encourage along these lines is when you get to doing a good bit of helpers and you're also doing Android and iOS, it's probably simpler to do it as a helper because it reduces some of the noise in your Ionic components. It lets you isolate a lot of your native calls all into this area of your code base, which is really isolated and distinct. And then you're just exposing these simple helpers that you can call. So it really keeps your Ionic code base clean. So that's probably where I draw the line between calling something directly in Ionic or not. If it's a one-liner, not too big a deal. Not too big a deal at all. I mean, you could certainly do right here if native.ios is iOS here, and that would work too. Now, again, of course, if this executes on web, it's not going to do anything. It's just simply ignored. Doesn't hurt performance at all. It's a JavaScript proxy that's just dead. It doesn't break, doesn't throw an error, it just is inactive on the web.
That's awesome. I think the benefit, it's like super easy because native exists, so you can do like with one check. So this will bring the total lines to 5, and you have then Android versus iOS, I guess, if statement, this line, the Android version. But what I even see is this with this separate package. I'm a big NX fan, as most of you probably know, as Nathan himself is. I can see this live as a separate package where you just have like a native access package, and maybe you have 2 Ionic apps that use exactly the same native functionality. And
you could, and someone did recently create a plugin for this NativeScript for Capacitor integration that does help cases like that in particular. It's under NativeScript community, and I think it's called Capacitor. Let me double check here. That's a good thing to reference because the gentleman who put it together is the founder of the Ionic Japan user group, and he created the plugin, and it allows you to kind of expand the natural API that comes from NativeScript for Capacitor. Here it is, Capacitor plugins. Yeah, and this is definitely worth a look. I would say it's certainly an angle and an approach where you could reuse and share different NativeScript bits across multiple Ionic apps.
Yep. It's
So
like having a little mini NativeScript inside your Ionic app. This is kind of the feeling that I have.
It's quite literally that. And a lot of things about this integration, honestly, to me, speak more to what NativeScript is about than perhaps even NativeScript proper, as some may call it. But there really is no such thing as NativeScript proper. NativeScript in general is a broad concept of just empowerment in JavaScript for the native platform APIs. But there really is a lot of naturalness with NativeScript that comes through in this integration that allows NativeScript to kind of be what it's always been, which is just that native empowerment.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think this can even make the bridge easier for people, because currently with NativeScript, let's say proper for the sake of the conversation, you still need to know, like, hey, how do I write these XML things? It's not literally just your Angular or React app. It's a little bit different. And it looks like this. Yeah, it's actually just the real bridge. So it's super interesting.
And what a lot of people may see on this on the surface, and I think it's easy to see it, is that you might say, okay, this seems pretty crazy. How could I possibly maintain this? And how do I know if this breaks in the future? Don't native platform APIs create their own breaking changes when new versions come out? And how do you mitigate breaking changes? If you've got native APIs integrated into a web code base, how do you manage and mitigate risk, as breaking changes with new platform updates and that sort of thing?
Right.
The answer is NativeScript's metadata generator. So the metadata generator, each time you build the NativeScript app, it actually is looking at those latest APIs. So any breaking changes are actually exposed on the surface in the way that NativeScript was designed. So those breaking changes come along with you. So you generally will know those on the surface, and anything new that is made available. That's why you often don't need to wait for a NativeScript version, because the metadata generator is live and active and always generating off whatever version you're running with. So if iOS, what are we on right now? iOS 14? Yeah, so let's say iOS 15 comes out next month and you run this against iOS 15, because the metadata generator is actually bubbling out all those APIs, anything new that's added, you can type against those there. Now, you may say, it doesn't make quite a lot of sense, because aren't your typings coming through the type definitions that are defined here, and they come through here. So NativeScript types is a package that's published on NPM that basically provides all those typings that the meta generator generated off the time that this was published. So you could surmise that these types match whatever the latest iOS is today, which is 14.4, right? So it's worth noting, though, that that is just types. So if there was a new API, you could actually generate the types yourself. There's actually a way that you can do that using the NativeScript CLI, and that would generate live against the platform, which you can then plug in here, and those are the same types that are published on NPM. So there is a way to always get strong type checking on the latest platform release anytime you want. So there's always a way to mitigate that and see what that is.
Awesome. Yeah, I was about to ask you. You didn't write all of these bridges yourself, but this is the NativeScript generator that actually creates all the types. This is pretty great.
This right here, yes. Now let's add a native API, and let's actually create something on the fly here just to see. So we looked at kind of direct native API access inside of Ionic components. Let's also flip that the other way, and let's create a helper ourselves, and let's look at that process. So again, I'm going to do something here rather trivial, if you will, because this is provided by Ionic, but I just want to show a simple example. I'm going to create a native share dialog. Capacitor already has this in the docs. You can open a share dialog. But this is a good example of like why this matters and where this could become useful, because it's possible that the options that are provided from the Capacitor plugin may give you most of what you want, but maybe not that one thing, right? Mm-hmm. And that's the problem with plugins often, is that sometimes they'll get you 95% of the way there, but there's like 5% that you're sort of missing, that you're struggling with. And that's where this can help you. So let's go to create a new API here. We're going to call it Open Share Dialog. And the first thing that I always do inside of here when I'm creating new APIs is I just create the strong type for it. So I want to create a new method called OpenShareDialog, and I'll just type it here as a standard method call. Whether you use this syntax with the arrow or that, they're the same thing, so it doesn't really matter. And then what that allows us to do is from here, we can actually use that here as well. So OpenShareDialog, and we'll have that equal a new function we're going to do. And instead of being an empty method, we're going to allow the Ionic component to pass what to share in this share dialog. So let's call things to share. Let's let it be an array of strings. Let's say we could share text for a text message. We could share URLs, whatever. So now you can see the strong type checking coming in here because we created and exposed a method here with an empty signature. And so it's actually warning us here. So this is our strong type checking coming in alive here and helping you manage your own code. So we just want to make sure that the signature for the strong type checking that we have matches. So there we have that. And now that goes away. So from here, we're going to do just straight platform development. So I'm actually going to create an activity controller here. I'm going to use something that's provided by iOS. You can find this in the docs. It's called the Activity View Controller. And I'm going to construct one of these. This is pretty typical in NativeScript development in general, and also common for those on iOS who have done iOS development before. But we're going to use alloc, which is a shorthand for allocate. And then that gives you all the access to all the initializers for this class, which one is called init with activity. And actually, let me get IntelliSense a moment to catch up on our live stream here. Yeah. And there it is, init with activity items, and we'll use this one here. And what this takes is an array of activity items, and that's going to be our argument there. So this is going to be things to share. And then the second argument there is something we don't care about, so we're just going to pass null. Right. And it will just ignore that second argument because we don't care about that. And then the other interesting thing that we're going to do here is we want to show this. We want to show it on something here. So we want to show this in the Ionic app. And the way to do that is to actually use an API that's provided from the NativeScript for Capacitor integration, and it's called the iOS Root View Controller. Before I type it, I'll show you where that is mentioned in the docs. And there is an API reference right here for the integration. And this is the iOS Root View Controller. This is the root view controller of your capacitor app, or topmost presenting controller if you were using the context of a actual opened modal in the capacitor context. So we can actually use that here. It's called iOS Root View Controller. And we'll give a moment for our IntelliSense to pick up. How much time do we have, Bram?
Oh, I got Friday is my next live with Chow, and then up until that day, we can talk all night, all day.
Okay, well, this is, I think, the last example I was going to show, so we can just go to general discussion questions here in a moment.
Yeah, if people have questions, please let us know, and we'll pop on the screen in a bit. And in general, I'm pretty excited with what I see. And actually, NXPM stack, my full stack generator, has Ionic right now with Capacitor. So this was sponsored by one of my clients who use it and who need it, and they kindly sponsored development of this. And with Devin Shoemaker's great plugin for NX and Ionic, I got to a very compelling thing. But this actually gives me to the next level, I think, because I'm also working on a few native SDKs, and currently I don't have any way to do this, and I'm not really interested in learning native development for iOS. And I mean, I'd love to, but I just don't have the time and the energy to learn Swift and Kotlin on a basis that I can be really dangerous with it. And I think this really helps me enable getting there, or at least getting those things.
The real bear about the development, it's not necessarily that Java per se is hard to learn or Objective-C. I mean, you'll hear there's endless debates on that. I mean, each language has its own quirks. It's more that it's a context switch. Anytime you have to jump IDEs or jump into a different environment and jump into a different syntax and language in general, it's a context switch, and it can be burdensome. And maintaining that is really hard at scale. Yeah. And so that's really more what NativeScript tries to help solve, is bring those platform APIs to you in your TypeScript code base, which is where you are, which is where you're developing and where you get the same strong type checking. And the development experience is really is fun.
Definitely looks like it. And I really like error-driven development as long as it comes from TypeScript. I love having it fail early and often. What I just saw, you add a thing to your interface, it doesn't get, you don't comply with the contract and it starts screaming. And I think that's a really helpful thing.
Yeah, maybe I'll show an error here in a moment, because I mentioned I would try to do that so we can see kind of what happens there. So what I'm doing here, I got iOS root view controller. It picked up an IntelliSense. It auto imported it from the API here, and that's mentioned in the Capacitor NativeScript docs there. We're going to use the present view controller animated completion, which is a pretty typical iOS API to basically take a view controller and open it. So we're just going to take our activity controller here. Let's see, there it is. And then the second argument is whether we want to animate it, and we like animation, so we are going to pass through there because it's nice to see it animate in. And the completion is an optional, but the typing is always with Objective-C or terse, so those come through with NativeScript, and generally you can just pass nil if you were working in Objective-C, so we can just pass what we'd be used to in that sort of scenario, which is passing null here, because we don't care about getting a completion callback. So we have an open share dialog. We're now going to use that here. And now here's one key important thing to understand about the integration, and it's why I wanted to show this example last. We created a new helper method, which means we modified code inside the NativeScript bundle. Well, right now, the way I have my development environment set up is I have an Angular server that's running locally here that's giving us live sync against our Ionic app that's hosted here in Capacitor. Let me open that back up here. But we are actually modifying the bundle that's loaded at runtime. So probably in the future versions of this, you will be able to include it with live sync rounds like that. But for right now, if you're adding new helpers that you want exposed, the best thing to do is actually to run this command that's added when the integration is added. And this is a good time to actually explain what happens when you run this. So open share dialog is here. Before I build this entirely, let me wire it up to something here. So I'm just going to add another helper here on our Explorer container. Let's see, we'll call this open share dialog right here. Add it right here. And then I'll just bind that to a new method that we create, which is going to call our new API.
And then I expect this to scream like, hey, I don't know this method.
If we were to run it, it would. Yes, actually, I guess I could have done that. Should have done that. I can do that. Let's do that. Yeah, let's do that actually. So I'm going to start the Angular server back up here. I'm not going to rebundle the new method that we've added to. This is a new augmented method that we add called open share dialog. I'm not going to enable that just yet. I'm just going to launch the app again here. And let me see. I probably need to relaunch it on my device, I think, since I stopped it, I think.
Now, this is something else I realized when I was doing more with this local SDK. We are actually pretty lucky bunch with our web development setup that we have like instant reload. We take it for granted. Definitely. And then we're like, this is not fast enough, we want HMR. And then HMR is not fast enough, we want Vite, like the new Vue runtime. This is all super great, but if you look at these poor mobile developers, native developers that are just using iOS or Android, you basically have to rerun your app the whole day.
So, yeah, in some typical cases, there are some ways to do some live sync develop there, and you do get some kind of live reload scenarios. But certainly, web development is, offers probably the best experiences, and that's really why Ionic development is super nice in general, because you can develop with all those advantages, and the browser is a great place to develop at scale So.
Yeah, and this is definitely something I've been, so over the last year, 2020, I did quite a bit of React Native, which has definitely its own nice things. But still, you run it inside an emulator, and that is not always nice. And maybe even like interacting with a real app, it's like, okay, you have to click in Navigator, and you have to, basically, that has quirks. Like the keyboard works a bit different than the real native keyboard. And once I got back to Ionic again, I was like, okay, this is definitely very nice. You put it in there. You put your, your DevTools in the mobile mode, and you have your mobile app. And there's definitely a lot to say. And also, I think inspecting the elements and figuring out what goes wrong and using CSS. There's a lot to be said for having this, this stack.
Yeah, I mean, Capacitor enables all those APIs. They have a plugin system with Capacitor too. There's a lot of great Capacitor plugins out there. And I think the Capacitor community scope, I believe it is Capacitor community, has some great stuff that's available there. So always check that. It also has an API where you can get at the platform APIs, and you can build, Objective-C, Swift, and Java code and kind of put it into a distributable plugin that you can plug into your Capacitor app. So definitely check out that from the Capacitor docs. Let me see if this, I might need to reload it on my phone, but let me see. Is it running now? No, let me just rerun it here real quick. So let me relaunch this.
Your son on the screen?
That is my son on screen.
Yeah, awesome. Featured.
He is a lot of fun.
Yeah, looks like it. Definitely looks like it. And he's a Linux supporter, as it seems.
He's a big Linus Torvalds fan. Yeah, you gotta straighten him out. Let's see if we can get this going here. So what we're expecting to see is a new link on the device, and it's OpenShare Dialog, but we have not rebundled because we created a new helper method there, and so it shouldn't work. It should do nothing, and let's see what happens. And you can see we get what you would generally see if you tried to call some unknown code in your web app, right? So it tried to call OpenShare Dialog, but it doesn't exist. Because we're trying to call that off the native object, if you recall. And that was a new method that we added to our NativeScript bundle. So when you install this integration, it adds 2 scripts to your NPM scripts as helpers here. And one is build NativeScript and one is build mobile. Build mobile is generally what's used before you go and run it in Capacitor and actually run on the device and kind of do your full integration testing with the whole device features. The main difference is subtle. Build mobile is going to do a parallel or a sequential build off your Angular build first, and then when that's done, it's going to build the NativeScript bundle. Right. And you can use either or there, just depending on what case you're running into. But like for this case, all we need to do is build NativeScript here. And what this is going to do, it's actually going to kick up Webpack, and it's going to build that isolated bundle. So that little NativeScript area that we were working in, it's actually going to build that into a single JavaScript file. And that contains the NativeScript code that's executed against the device in real time. So let me just execute this here. And I'm running Node 15. A lot of people ask me that sometimes. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. I'm running Node 15 NPM 7, which is totally fine to use. If you're using NPM 7, you might see this prompt. I believe this only gets prompted once if you're on NPM 7, but you can choose yes. That's just the, and I think the next time you run it, it doesn't prompt that. But you can see what happened. It created a NativeScript build complete www.navescriptindex.js. So let's actually look at that. www, which is the bundled Ionic code that ends up on our device. And you can see NativeScript gets bundled in here. into a single JS file. So this is a Webpack setup here. When you run it in production mode, it does run an optimized set along all of the NativeScript code that you have. But this is a typical Webpack bundle here. And the interesting thing about that is that if you look at the iOS delegate for your Capacitor app, you'll see where that's actually handled. So I'm going to open that and show you that. That is an app. This is from the Capacitor iOS harness here. App. And then inside this folder, you'll see app delegate Swift. So the Swift file, you'll actually see this is called right when the app boots on the device. And this is where the metadata kicks in, and it actually runs that bundle. So this is actually picking up that bundle we just bundled, and that's what allows all your NativeScript code to live in infamy on your device, if you will, and execute in real time. And that's actually technically what's happening.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So kind of the fact that you show this kind of takes away the magic, but it's cool to see that there's no real magic. It's just there.
There's no real magic.
Yeah.
There's no real magic.
I love it. I love it. And but I also think, and that's from what it looks, this also makes it pretty easy to debug and to hack, because you literally have the Webpack target sitting in your app. I guess you commit this as well, this NativeScript index.js. Yes. So you can review it, and you can definitely see what happens there.
Well, I guess if you're committing your www, I think typically you wouldn't on that, since the www is built and compiled locally anytime you build changes for your Ionic app, especially with Capacitor. So I don't think typically you would commit that, but you can, of course, key into that and even set some breakpoints inside of Chrome Debugger when you queue that up.
Right.
Yeah. So what I'm going to go back to now, we created, rebundled our NativeScript code because we created a new helper that we can use here. And so now we should expect this to actually work properly, and we can see what actually happens. So I'm just starting up the Angular local server here so we get live sync again. And then I am going to open the app on the device one last time here. And we'll look at this last example. And while that's building, I'm just trying to think of anything else that I want to mention. Oh, let me actually look at those Capacitor plugins here. So I think it's Capacitor Community. Yeah, and so you'll find a bunch of rich stuff here under Capacitor Community on GitHub. And if we go back here, you'll see there's quite a few plugins already hosted under Capacitor Community. So you can always check these first. Always with plugins, look to see if there's an available plugin out there. Give it a shot if it solves your case. And NativeScript's really there if you need to tool or go beyond what that plugin provides, or do something specific or nuanced that perhaps you're not able to do right away for any particular reason.
Nice. Yeah, I really love seeing how these things come together, how these ecosystems merge. I'm not a big fan of tribalism in general, and even less so in our community. I think this is a sentiment we both agree on very much. You don't have to choose one and stick to it like religiously. You can mix and match and try to see what works well. And yeah, this is definitely an effort that I appreciate seeing.
No, that's great. Yeah, I certainly agree with that sentiment. I think tribalism, is easy to occur across language lines, just like cultural lines, perhaps. But like when it comes to JavaScript, I've always been of the mind that those that are working in the JavaScript industry, if you will, if you can call JavaScript an industry, I guess you can, right? Sure. Those who are working in the JavaScript community, really, there's so many awesome things around JavaScript, and it'd be nice to see less and to know tribalism around JavaScript. I think it's unavoidable when you get to language lines sometimes, just probably human nature at that point, but I don't think you really necessarily need it in JavaScript in general.
I think we often try to fix the same problem on a different way. And if I speak for myself, after doing primarily Angular for a few years, moving into React for a few years, and doing that basically on the side, made me a better Angular developer and made me appreciate more the tools I have in Angular, like observables, RxJS, and a clear lifecycle, clear idea of the lifecycle, and React, where it's just like zero ceremony, and it's like really low cost of code, little code to achieve simple things. So yeah, best of both worlds there.
So we've got our app launched here now. We are going to do open share dialog, and let's see what occurs. So, oh yeah, I'm glad we ran into this. So this is a capacitor thing. We bundled the code, but we did not do a cap sync, which means that our www did not make it to our app. So what we want to do anytime we create or make modifications to code that goes into that www folder, so we want to be sure to run it in an npx cap sync. This is just going to make sure that any assets, which the NativeScript bundle is considered really an asset of the app, this is going to update that folder inside of all your native targets here. So it's going to update it in the Android app, and we should see it actually update here in the iOS app. And then we'll launch from Xcode one more time. So yeah, that's a key thing. I forget that sometimes myself, and I think in Capacitor 3, they have some other things they're doing, I believe, to improve some of that. And there may already be some things that to handle that better that I may be unaware of as well.
Yeah, you can imagine this being able to auto-sync, maybe with some hash of what's there and what's not. But I think this is my steps that I always do when I test in Capacitor. And I guess so my apps are generally very simple, so I don't need a lot of native capacity. So I just build it in the browser if I use Ionic, test it once in Capacitor, and if it works, ship it, basically. And
ship it.
Yeah, if it compiles, ship it.
So yeah, I'm glad we ran into that together for sure right there. That's a really important little piece right there. So I believe when I hit play right here, it will run and then stop. That's pretty typical after you run an npx cap sync, but it might run here for us. Let me make sure. Looks like it's going to run. Usually if that occurs after a cap sync, you just hit run again and it will go.
Yeah, I guess people that are used to working with Xcode, they kind of know how to get stuff working at some point. It can be a bit intense at times, a bit persistent, if you will. One of the best advice around Xcode is Xcode hates things changing under its feet. So if you're doing anything code-wise in VS Code that's going to touch your Xcode project at all, usually Xcode doesn't like that. So it's always a good idea to close Xcode if you're doing things like that and then reopen it. Usually will solve the majority of oddities. So we're going to run this one last time. Cool. And I guess between, so Capacitor is a... basically there to replace Cordova, if I can say so. It's created and fills up the gap that Cordova has.
Yes, definitely a nice successor and much more enhanced and nicer.
Yeah.
So there is our share dialog right there.
Awesome.
And all we're sharing in this case is the URL right there. But for instance, if I were to choose messages, we can see there's our URL in our message line right there. So, you know, that is a pure native device share dialog that we coded on the fly without ever leaving, you know, really our TypeScript code base. And it actually didn't take a lot of code to do that. That's literally all that is. But the nice thing about that is this is stuff that's in the apps, and if there was something particular you need to do with sharing on that device that perhaps wasn't achieved directly through a plugin or an extra option that you needed that just wanted to get going, you were blocked, you were 98% about to deploy and you ran into this one thing. This is just another option to where you can really get at that device directly and do what you need to do.
Yeah. Awesome. I can see people coming to Stack Overflow, finding some solutions and just want this thing to happen. paste it in your code, create a little wrapper around it, and run with it.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So that's I tell you, the last thing I should mention, and let me go ahead and close this here. Actually, wait. I will show one last thing here, because I don't think they have made the ngconf videos public yet or live from last week.
Yeah, you're at it.
But I think they will be. I think they'll be up pretty soon, perhaps by tomorrow or early next week. But until we get there, let me actually go back to the device. I'll show you the app that we did using exactly these strategies for ngconf. Go to that. I believe this is it right here. We did a native Flix app, and this was an app where you could watch musicals on the fly. And one thing I ran into is I was trying some of those video plugins for Capacitor, and they worked really well, except one issue. So this kind of hits at kind of the whole reason for this in the first place. I couldn't achieve the picture-in-picture behavior with videos with that particular plugin. And so what we did for the ngconf app, let me close this, and I'll open up the code for this too, because we can take a brief look at it before we end for a few questions if there are any. But this ngconf Ionic NativeScript is the repo we did for ngconf here. And once the video is up, I'll share this more. I don't think many know about this repo because it was mentioned as an ending slide on that ngconf talk. But I'll share this more once that's up. But this is the app that's in this repo. It is an Ionic Angular app. It's hosted on Capacitor. And what we did is when you go inside here to view one of these videos, is it creates a completely custom native video player experience. That's at the top, that animated in. But the key thing is the interaction between the native view layer and the DOM. So when I pop this out here, you can see the DOM reacts and actually takes up the rest of that space. So you can scroll this, but you can also switch apps here. We could go to this other Ionic app and move this around. Or we could go back to this app, move it back. And then what we can do is we get events back. If I pop it back in, the DOM reacts and moves the text out. And now you can scroll text up under. So this, what we're looking at on screen, is a completely custom created video player that we did just like we were talking about here through all of these examples. And right here in source, you'll see the same setup that we were going through. There's a NativeScript folder. We created a streaming video folder. This houses the Android implementation. This actually is fully operable on Android as well. So you can see a pretty advanced, well, I would say a very advanced Android example of how to create a custom video streaming player with Android APIs directly. And the same here exists in iOS. And we expose methods out to the Ionic component to control this whole experience here. So if I go back, we can see it actually animates up and out. And then we can go and view a different musical here. This is Beetlejuice.
This is pretty stunning stuff. And I mean, yeah, this is real life stuff. We can check if we can return a string from iOS, and that's cool, and or screen brightness. But having things like this is where you get into like, why would you want to do this? I guess the web cannot, and you really want to have
the main reason we chose this example is because this behavior here, this PNP mode, I could not get that to work properly. Now, it's not to say that there are some plugins out there that can do that with Capacitor, but I had trouble with the few that I tried. So I would like to hear if anyone out there who sees this knows of one that can do that out of the box. Definitely let me know, because I would love to look at it. But in this case, we just used NativeScript to do it, to create the video player, and that gave us everything we needed there.
Awesome. And if I recall correctly, in the demo, because I was lucky enough to have a ticket, there's also a feature here that if the device goes on low battery mode, you actually keep track of where you were, and it will resume if you open it up again.
Yes, so we have some integrations with that low power mode, and we hook up a battery level. You can get the battery level from a capacitor API that's in their docs, but this actually wires up a listener. So this is actually a way to notify you of different capacitor or different battery levels notifications, and this wires it up for Android and iOS. This actually uses broadcast receivers on Android to do it, and this uses the notification center, which is just built-in APIs for iOS.
Awesome. And excellent guest performance from Alex from Native Scripting in your live stream. That was super funny.
It was a lot of fun, and you know, I know a lot of people were a little confused on the context because we tried something a little different. We didn't give too much context on the technology scope to start out with. We really wanted to try to do a skit more so, rather than kind of doing a formal introduction to things. So to explain the context there, that's why it was done the way it was.
Yeah, definitely outstanding demo there from the three of you. And super interesting technology. And yeah, I think you drove the point home pretty well. There's no questions, so that's a general good sign that people understand what you're doing here. One of my students from Bsoft Labs actually joined apparently and says, I don't understand many things, but it's inspiring to see you coding. So that's one of the commands. CX here says,
thank you.
Great demo. Thanks for the demo and great explanation, and loves the name NativeFlix. So this might be nice endeavor to take away at some point.
Thank you for that. It's always fun to do something around video and audio for sure when it comes to tech, because video and audio is always pretty intense from an API standpoint. So it's always fascinating tech-wise when you get into that. But thanks for those kind words, and I really hope the videos are up, and we would love to share it with some others. And it was fun to do. So hopefully people see the practical use cases here, because this is really about the practical use cases. That's really what this is all about.
Yeah, awesome. I'm definitely going to give it a go in my workspace, and I'll definitely let you know when I'm stuck. I always know to find you. Always up for a challenge, so that's good. Yeah, thanks so much for showing us around today, Nathan. It was super inspiring to see. It's amazing what the NativeScript team came up with, and I'm looking forward to see what's next.
Thanks for hosting this, as always, Bram, and looking forward to the next one next week. And who are you having next week, by the way?
I'm actually going to have tomorrow, I'm going to have Chow. And Chow's going to show a demo of Chow is one of my resident speakers on the show, and he's going to show his new project, 3JS for Angular. Declarative way to do 3JS, which is the demo things. So we're kind of getting into Angular 3 there. So that's kind of a thing that never got to be Angular 3. Tomorrow we'll show it on the show. So that's going to be tomorrow, really I think, same time. And yeah, looking forward to that as well.
Very cool. Well, thanks for the attention, everyone. And thank you, Bram, again. And we'll look forward to chatting with you when I can every time.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody, for joining. It was a great show. Thanks, Nathan. And we'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.